Arc Warlock really isn't everybody's first choice when it comes to DPS, but what if I told you that Arc Soul, of all things, can output some pretty wild damage on bosses? Arc Soul is a Warlock aspect that allows your rifts to grant allies Arc Souls, which are autonomous turrets that fire at whatever they look at. It also makes your rift charge significantly faster when near allies. Arc Soul on its own is pretty weak. It doesn't really do all that much other than deal a little bit of extra damage. However, in a raid scenario, we don't just have one person with Arc Soul, we have 6. With 6 Arc Souls, this becomes a different story, and the amount of damage that a big cloud of Arc Souls puts out is pretty significant and puts Stormcaller into a pretty good place for DPS. In this, I'm going to run the numbers to see how good it really is, and see if it's actually worth it to run a Stormcaller on a raid team. To get started, let's get some good numbers for Arc Soul. Arc Soul without Amplified deals 1526 per shot, and fires in bursts of 3 every second. With Amplified, it deals the same damage, but it fires in bursts of 5 instead of 3. On its own, this damage seems pretty crappy, but remember, all you need to do to give your entire team Arc Souls is place a rift. If each Arc Soul deals 3 pellets worth 1526 damage per second, totaling to 4578 damage per second, then 6 Arc Souls goes up to 27,468 damage per second, just from the Arc Souls alone. Even though this damage is spread across your entire team, we can attribute it to the Stormcaller, and say that dropping your rift on the team during the damage phase will increase the Stormcaller's DPS by however much the Arc Souls do. Upon looking at the numbers, using Arc Soul in a damage phase results in a 32% damage increase if you're using a firing line linear with Radiant. 32% is a lot of damage, falling just shy of Lumina, which is the biggest single buff in the game. You're already sitting at some pretty solid damage. On top of all of this, in the TWAB on November 3rd, Bungie announced that Arc Soul would be getting a flat 71% damage boost in PvE, which is going to kick our Arc Soul DPS up even further. This 71% increase in Arc Soul damage is going to push our DPS up to 46,970 for just the Arc Soul alone, which corresponds to a 55% increase in the Stormcaller's DPS, assuming they're using a firing line plus Radiant linear. On top of this, you've also got a damage super, Chaos Reach. Chaos Reach isn't amazing, but it does output a decent bit of burst DPS and saves you on ammo. Stormcaller may not be the best neutral game subclass, but Arc Soul's damage output in a damage phase is pretty wild when applied to your whole team, and can easily make Stormcaller worth it to have on a raid team. Just a disclaimer first, the following build is not made for a Grandmaster situation. It's mainly built for 6-person teams, like in Master or Day 1 raids, and I'd recommend checking out my Shadebinder or Void Warlock builds if you'd like a good Grandmaster build. Trying to force Stormcaller to be a brawler-style ad-clear subclass like Striker is like trying to force Night Stalker to do the same. Similarly to Night Stalker though, Stormcaller 3.0 excels more at keeping you and your allies supplied with abilities and handing out buffs like Arc Souls and Ionic Traces more than anything else. So here's the plan. The build I'm about to propose is meant to maximize your team support while still keeping enough neutral game for yourself to stay alive. Your main ability loop is going to consist of throwing out abilities, which may be less powerful than those of other Arc subclasses, but will generate ludicrous amounts of Ionic Traces, Jolts, and Blinds. It won't be a brawler, but rather a centerpiece for your team. You keep them supplied while they do the damage. And then with the Arc Soul tech, when it comes to that damage phase, you'll be outputting insane levels of DPS. It may not be the strongest build in the neutral game, but it's meant to be more of a DPS-focused build. The problem with Destiny is just that most support builds simply are not needed, outside of a Wall of Radiance for damage phases, and the Stormcaller build is really no exception to the rule. This build is simply trying to make the most of the subclass to take advantage of this damage tech, if any of you are diehard Stormcaller fans. But first, we're just going to touch on the loadout. For mods, we have one Reaping Wellmaker, a well generator mod that creates a Void Well upon your first weapon kill after casting a Rift. Next, we have 2 Wells of Tenacity, which is a Well Consumer mod that grants 50% damage resist for a short time after picking up a Void Well. Next, we have Elemental Time Dilation, which is a Well utility mod that allows buff-based Well Consumer mods to stack. And finally, we have Seeking Wells, a Well utility mod that causes wells you generate to seek to you and allies. For aspects and fragments, we have Electrostatic Mind and Arc Soul. And next, you're going to want to go with the Sparks of Resistance, Beacons, Ions, and Shock. I'd recommend running Flashbang Grenade and the Melee and Rift are up to you. For exotics, you'll want Fallen Sunstar and Delicate Tomb, and I'd recommend running a Harmonic Siphon on your helmet, just to bring even more support to the party. This build is a really simple one. Your abilities will come back super quickly due to Fallen Sunstar, and Delicate Tomb will be fed with a surplus of Ionic Traces to keep it running. All you gotta do is spam Delicate Tomb and let Fallen Sunstar do the work. Whenever you cast your Rift, your next weapon kill will drop a Void Well, which will grant you 16 seconds of 50% damage resist, which when combined with 100 Resilience and Spark of Resistance, brings you up to 75% damage resist. You'll want to make sure you use your abilities often, since they recharge much faster than you would think. Your primary goal above all though is to stay near your teammates. Fallen Sunstar grants your teammates 15% of all their neutral game abilities upon picking up a trace. Due to the combination of aspects and fragments, your Delicate Tomb will generate between 1 and 3 Ionic Traces on every kill. This means that you can keep your allies supplied with ability energy pretty much all the time, just by killing things. Although Delicate Tomb has some very solid ad clearing potential, you want to make sure you're prioritizing generating Ionic Traces by targeting enemies that are blinded by your Flashbang Grenades or jolted by Delicate Tomb. Arc Souls that you generate will also create Ionic Traces, making them even more plentiful. Just stay near your team, generate traces to fuel their abilities, and use Arc Souls during damage phase for that 55% damage buff after the buff to Arc Soul. Overall, Stormcaller is still kind of a lacking subclass. It's just kind of a worse version of the other two Arc subclasses, and I really had to stretch the limits of what you could do with it to make it remotely viable and high-end. I would still give this build a try though. It could be worth running at a day 1 raid pretty much just due to the damage, even if the neutral game does suck a little. Please like and subscribe if you like what I do, and I'll see you next time.